there, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenna Lee, and I'm here restoring home, family, and spirit. I'm all about bringing the focus back to the home, and I do that through showing you tried and true homemaking skills and sharing your life here on the farm. When you look on the internet to find sourdough recipes, there are so many options. There are so many people out there who are posting recipes all the time. They all say the best sourdough recipe, right? Which one really is the best for you? What's gonna work best in your house, in your climate, and with your schedule, right? So I decided to run a little experiment. I chose the top sourdough recipes on my Google search, and I'm going to bake 4, 5, 6 of these recipes and see which ones work best for me. After baking sourdough for about a year and a half, I do know this. I know that I like to prepare my sourdough in the evening and do the bulk fermentation at night. And so in the morning, after 8, 12 or so hours of the bulk fermentation, I can fold, stretch throughout the day and shape and bake my loaves of bread. So I chose the recipes that had the similar method that I'm already used to using. They might have each a little bit differences here and there, but all around their methods were very similar and very similar to what I'm used to using and what I basically want to keep using. So one thing that's going to be different about all these recipes is the water percentage in each recipe, the ratio of water to flour. And that's really going to be the dividing factor here of what makes these recipes different, because I'm using the same method throughout. Some other factors that might play into how these recipes are different or how they work different for you is your sourdough starter. If your sourdough starter was nice and bubbly and ripe and ready when you were beginning your sourdough recipes. Another factor that could play into your sourdough can be the temperature of your home. You know, my sourdough breads are going to react differently to the weather here when it's cold and dry here in January as opposed to the weather in July when it's humid here and really hot, and my fermentation process is going to go so much faster. So keep that in mind when you are baking sourdough, and no matter what recipe you're using, your sourdough is a living, live culture and creature, and it's going to react differently to the environments. This first one is the Preppy Kitchen dough. It's a little bit dry and dense, so I wasn't able to stretch as far as I would during this stretch and fold process. The doughs are all acting a little bit different because they all have a different amount of water and flour ratio. This one from Feasting at Home is a tad wetter, and it's actually stretching really nicely. So that's cool. This was enough for 2 loaves, and it is extremely wet. So I'm gonna put a little bit more flour here on the board because it's just gonna stick all over to me. And I'm gonna cut this in half with my handy sourdough tool. One thing I have noticed is that the more moisture that the sourdough has in it, the more you're going to be able to stretch without the actual fibers of the dough breaking, which you don't want. You want to have one elastic body of dough. Now this one is so wet, I think I'm going to do that process one more time. First, I'm going to let it sit over here and rest. Do the exact same thing on the other half. So I folded, stretched, and shaped my bread, and I have all of these loaves sitting on top of my stove surface where it's nice and warm and toasty to do their final rise. Now most of these recipes suggested doing between 30 minutes to an hour for the rise time, the last and final rise. And so I like to just keep mine in a nice warm place since it's really cold outside. I have my Dutch oven in the oven, heating up. It's at 450 degrees, and I'm just gonna cook them all at that same temperature. So my next step is to turn them out on parchment paper, score them, and put them into the oven to bake. It's super important when you're running an experiment like this to keep your labels straight. So although I tried 5 different recipes for this experiment, here are the 3 I did yesterday, all at the same time. And what was really interesting about that is doing all of 3 of these different recipes at the same time, I really could feel and see the texture and difference in the doughs and how each of them reacted. And seeing them each baked up is really quite interesting. So I thought we could cut these open and really just take apart the differences. This one right here was the denser of the doughs. It was the driest dough, and so really the loaf feels a little bit more dense. It does have a nice lift to it, and we do have a nice crispy ear right here. You can really see how it's really lifted and expanded here, and that's nice. It's a little bit smaller than the other one, so I think that could be attributed to the denser loaf and less water. And I would say it is a little bit denser. It's definitely a thick loaf, but not bad. This was the wettest of the doughs, and ironically enough, this one is called Perfect Loaf. And you can see that in my oven. I don't know if it's our climate or what it is, but I've often haven't had very much luck with really wet dough. And so you can see it got all wonky and wobbly inside of the oven, and it didn't really get that rise and lift. It doesn't have that same kind of rise happening here that you can see on these other loaves. Just kind of went blah, okay? And it just makes me laugh. This one's called Perfect Loaf. It is my least perfect loaf. So let's cut into this and see what this looks like. Okay, we've got a nice pocket right here. And the rest of it's pretty dense. Now, I would say if we were talking about the Goldilocks story, this one was kind of in between. It wasn't too wet and it wasn't too dry. It was, you could say it was just right. I do like how it kind of opened up here. The rise on it was nice. I think it's a nice sized loaf. It feels pretty light. I don't think it's perfect by any means, but I wouldn't call it a failure or a huge success. I think it's just fine. And you can see inside of this loaf, we have a lot of air pockets going on here. It's nice and open. I know there are lots of fancy sourdough terms. I do not know all of them. Feel free to leave a friendly comment. We're all learning as we go here. So this was simply a home baker's experiment to see which recipe works best in my home. There are so many different variables that can affect your sourdough. Every bread recipe that I saw on the internet looked great. The pictures look great. They look like successful loaves, but you really don't know until you really give it a try in your own kitchen. Now, given that being said, I'm sure these are experienced bakers making all of these recipes, and I don't doubt or disclaim that they are wonderful bakers and they know what they're talking about. You really just have to experiment with what recipe works for you. I tried 5 different recipes. I will actually list the blog posts and recipes down in the show notes below so you can see which ones I used. I'll list them from my favorite bread recipes, or the ones that work the best for me, from top to bottom. I hope that this little experiment was helpful to you, the home sourdough baker who is learning through trial and error. My best advice to you, home baker, is to don't stop at the first flop or failed loaf. The best learning is by doing. And so don't stop at the first fail or the second fail or the third fail, but try a lot of different recipes and see which ones work best for you. And you're also gonna find recipes that you favor the most. Some of my best or favorite recipes come from Little Spoon Farm. All of her sourdough recipes seem to pan out for me. I've never had one flop. Like I said, in no way was this a negative or criticism towards any of these bloggers. What I want you to do next is go check out my video on my sourdough bread bags. Last week I made sourdough bread bags to put my fresh boules in, since my Ziploc freezer bags just were not cutting it. They're not the right size, and I'm sick of wasting plastic bags. So go out and check this tutorial. I'll put the link to that down in the description below, and I'll catch you next time. I'm here every week on Friday. Love you lots.